My friends, 2026 is shaping to be a decisive year for Ukraine, both on the battlefield and in diplomacy. So the big question is, what can we expect of Season 4 of the Ukraine war? First and foremost, we can expect more war.
Say hello to my little friend!
But just imagine an older and worn down Zelensky. I truly wish there would be peace, but I just don't believe in any ceasefire or peace deals at the moment. Once again, I really hope I'm wrong, but yeah, stop paying attention to this cinema about these negotiations because we keep going in circles. I don't want to say that Trump's attempts to make peace in Ukraine are pointless and naive. Oh, yeah, never mind. I don't want to get kidnapped by Delta Force. The sad reality is that neither Ukraine or Russia actually seek peace at the moment. Reason number one, Russia has not met any of its objectives and it can afford to continue the war. So why would it stop now? Especially when momentum is in their favor. Politico even wrote, the stubbornness of the Russian leader has left Trump frustrated and occasionally musing about whether he's being played. The only reason people think Russia wants to make a deal is because they convinced themselves that the Russian army is on its last legs. Reason number two for the failure of peace talks. The Ukrainian army as a whole still holds, and this despite constant Russian gains. Yes, the armed forces of Ukraine are on the back foot. Yes, they're getting exhausted, but as of now we haven't witnessed a structural collapse of the AFU. In such conditions, Zelensky simply cannot sign off entire oblasts to the enemy. So since there's no clear winner as of now, I believe the war will continue in 2026. A year where both armies will be forced to learn new skills to outmatch the enemy. It's January again, and by now you have started making resolutions to make the new year better for you. But the smartest people are already on the road to master the one skill that matters most in 2026, AI. From just a simple text model in 2019, AI has evolved to detecting diseases, automating work, and even running tasks in your sleep by 2025. Looking at these advancements, 2026 is the year AI is going to be at its peak, and for you also the last chance to get on the AI ship before it sails. Why not reclaim your past 6 years of loss in just 2 days? Because I want to introduce you to Outskill, the first ever AI-focused educational platform to accelerate AI learning for people like you and me. They're hosting a 2-day AI Mastermind training, live this Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time on both days. And right now is the perfect moment to join, because you can get in absolutely for free as part of their New Year Upskilling Fest. This 16 hours AI training has already built 10 million plus AI first professionals worldwide and is rated 4.9 out of 5 on Trustpilot. People from marketing, finance, operations, product, and engineering join this because this is something which is not specific to any industry, but that is now needed across every one of them. This is where you learn how to build AI agents that plan, write, execute, and report for you. Automate workflows that run even while you sleep. Connect tools like Sheets, Notion, CRMs, and email to create profitable systems. Use AI to save hours every week and get an unfair advantage at work. Not just that, you'll also learn how to profit from these skills. People from this very training have launched AI-powered services that bring in $2,000 to $3,000 weekly just by applying the systems they're taught. To kickstart your year, you also get premium lifetime bonuses like the AI Prompt Bible, the AI Profit Roadmap, and your personalized AI Toolkit Builder, but only if you attend both days. And here's the most interesting part. When you sign up, you'll get access to the 2026 AI Survival Hackbook, a comprehensive compilation of the upcoming AI shifts in 2026, and the practical steps you can take to be prepared. Seats are limited. Use the link in the description below to join. And don't forget to join the WhatsApp community to stay updated before the big blast. And we're back. Now I understand why diplomacy is the weakest point of all strategy games. Whatever you do, you always end up at war. So yeah, I believe the war will continue in 2026. And my hypothesis seems to be confirmed by the latest political news coming out of Ukraine. Here from Le Monde, Zelensky names spy chief Budanov as new head of Ukraine's presidential office. Kirill Budanov will replace Andriy Yermak, who resigned in November after investigators raided his house as part of a sweeping corruption probe. Budanov is regarded as one of Moscow's most formidable adversaries. He's also one of the strongest supporters of asymmetric warfare. So let's say he's definitely not a guy that will sign off entire oblasts to Russia without a fight. With him, we can expect a sharp rise in Ukrainian drone and missile strikes against Russian soil, the intensification of operations against Crimea and Russian naval assets, perhaps even a rise in covert operations like Spiderweb that destroyed and seriously damaged several strategic bombers of the Russian Air Force. Talking about that, Vasil Malyuk, the mastermind behind the operation, was replaced at the head of the SBU. Because of his feat of arms, Malyuk will remain in the organization, but will focus on military operations. This move is part of a broader reshuffle in Ukraine's security leadership and anti-corruption probes. The objective is straightforward: reassure Washington and project seriousness about peace. A prime example is Kyiv's push for this revised 20-point peace framework, drafted in close coordination with the Trump administration and unveiled last month. But it's all masquerade. The reality is that neither Ukraine or Russia actually want peace, but they have to pretend to gain the favors of the sugar daddy, President Trump. That's why these negotiations are a real clown show, and things keep going in circles. For example, a couple days after Zelensky revealed his pointless 20-point peace plan, whoops, Russia pulled a joker out of its sleeve. Putin's residence was attacked. Wow, what a timely coincidence. And then I'm looking at Ukrainian military commanders. Nobody's talking about stopping the war either. On the contrary, they all want to double down. They're all about
lock and load, bitches.
We can witness this with Budanov's appointment, but also Mikhailo Fedorov as the new Minister of Defense. Fedorov has emerged as a key driver of technological advancement in Ukraine's military efforts during the conflict. He's the one that asked Elon Musk to provide Starlink for the country in the early days of the war. And this technology proved to be a real game changer on the battlefield. Fedorov also actively advocated for a fundamental overhaul of the country's defense apparatus, with particular emphasis on drone-based operations and advanced digital control systems.
The number of destroyed enemy targets will only keep growing.
Did you hear the word peace? No, me neither. From a military perspective, Ukraine's new generation of government officials are also very realistic about the situation on the battlefield. In an interview with Suspilne, Kirill Budanov declared, "The Russian Federation is not stopping the offensive operation. Yes, they're not reaching the pace they dreamed of, but they're moving forward." It's a very cold and rational analysis. The big question is, what is Ukraine's battle plan for 2026? The current Ukrainian approach is clear: contain Russian forces, trade space for time. Sounds good. And then, wait for the Russian army or Russian economy to magically collapse. A proven strategy right up there with waiting for your dad to return with milk. Or there's better, the magical intervention of the coalition of the unwilling. Like real heroes, they decided to intervene once the war is over. Well, sounds promising. As you can see, the cornerstone of 2026 will depend on how Ukraine will perform on the battlefield. Let's start by analyzing what happened in the past year. Throughout 2024, the Russian army gained 3,348 square kilometers and an estimated 5,300 in 2025. That's an increase of almost 60%. And according to the data I have, in terms of casualties, the ratio remains approximately 1-to-1. And surprisingly, Russian fatalities seem to be lower in 2025 than they were in 2024. So for Russia in 2025, the cost in manpower for every square kilometer gained has drastically decreased. Who knows what we will see in 2026? We could witness incremental gains for the Russian army. Yet many analysts make the silly mistake of comparing these gains to the entire size of Ukraine. But this is just a way to cope with Russia's latest achievements on the battlefield. They will say things like, according to Deep State UA, Russia only conquered 0.67% of Ukraine in 2025. Everything is fine. Yes, without a doubt, everything is fine. I guess Ukraine just has to continue whatever they're doing and victory will be right there.
We are winning!
Since the fighting is taking place in eastern Ukraine, this is where we should zoom in. So let's check the map. As of early January 2026, Russia controls 99.68% of Luhansk Oblast. They're only missing this little bit here before full conquest. And then Russia also controls 78% of Donetsk Oblast. These two regions, commonly called the Donbass, are the main objectives for the Russian armed forces to capture. Then we have to remember that in September 2022, the Russian parliament officially annexed Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblasts as well. On the map, we can see that in Kherson, Russia controls 75% of the area. No real change since 2022, but it's in Zaporizhia that things are moving. The Russian armed forces now hold 75% of this oblast. Just like in Donetsk, there in the southern direction, Russian forces are effectively flanking the entire starting positions of Ukraine's 2023 summer offensive. Then on this beautiful chart provided to me by Willy OAM, we can see a clear spike in Russian gains in Zaporozhye starting in September 2025. So while the Ukrainian command was putting all in on the defense of Pokrovsk, Russian armies simply gained more grounds elsewhere. And as part of the same axis of progression, we can also observe that Russian army units penetrated into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, where they captured 180 square kilometers. For sure, it's less than 1% of the entire oblast, but they're just getting started. As you can see, this is new from the summer of 2025. Additionally, there is also fighting in Kharkiv Oblast, where Russian forces hold 4.64% of the land, and further north in Sumy 1% of the oblast following their cross-border incursion after the Kursk campaign. So this is the general overview. Now regarding actual objectives. In 2025, the Russian army managed to secure a lot of potato fields, but they did capture several urban areas like Taretsk, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, Mirnorhad, Siversk, and Hulielpole. What's interesting is that many of these towns were captured in the past few weeks, and 5 out of 6 are located in Donetsk Oblast. And apart from the Pokrovsk-Mirnorhad urban area that had a population of over 100,000 inhabitants before the war, most of these other settlements are relatively small.
A great success!
But yet, that doesn't mean they're not strategic, because every additional urban area that is captured is then turned into a new logistics node. But it's still crazy to think that it took the Russians 1 year to break through the Pokrovsk-Mirnorhad deadlock. From an operational perspective in 2026, we can believe that the Russian Army Command will probably follow the same strategy as in 2025. Slow and steady, attack along the entire front line in order to broaden the scope of operations, and force Ukraine to pin down its reserves even more. That way they can't gather enough resources to launch big counteroffensives. It's very similar to the strategy of Union forces in 1864 during the US Civil War. The benefit of this strategy is that Russia holds the strategic initiative, while Ukraine is confined to a reactive posture. Meanwhile, from a tactical perspective, the deadlock remains, finding a way to break through Ukraine's wall of drones. Multiple stratagems have already been attempted, such as building massive cages around armored vehicles or covering advancing infantrymen with anti-thermal cloaks. But there's no clear doctrine that could allow big breakthroughs. It's a bit like during World War I when commanders tried to figure out a way to defeat barbed wire and machine guns, which restricted any kind of big maneuvers. However, it seems the Russians thought of something brilliant: create their own wall of drones. I'm telling you, both armies keep copying each other. In this article, we can read that Ukraine's commander-in-chief Syrsky reported that Russia also plans to develop unmanned systems. I quote, "The Russians have followed our lead and created a separate unmanned systems force, which already numbers 80,000 service members. In the second stage, in 2026, they plan to double it to 165,500. That's absolutely mind-blowing. The Russians plan to have the size of the US Marine Corps, but just in drone units. Now, from a strategic perspective, I see two options for the Russian command in 2026. Option 1, take the bull by its horns. Concentrate efforts on Donetsk Oblast, which is Russia's primary objective of the war. That would mean pushing beyond Pokrovsk and converging on Dobropilya. Further to the east, that means storming Kostiantynivka, that is anyway already caught in a salient. I don't know how long the city can hold, but Russian patrols have already gained a foothold in the city. Further north, the assault on Liman, as part of an overall push against Slavyansk and Kramatorsk from the east. This option could also be prioritized by the Kremlin due to increasing concerns about the repercussions of the war on the Russian economy. But there's a second option: choose the path of least resistance and simply bypass the heavily fortified Donetsk Oblast. That means more sweeping gains for Russia in Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv Oblasts. I'll give you an example. In the South Donetsk-Zaporozhye direction, in the last 6 months, Russian forces advanced about 30 kilometers. If we follow a similar linear pattern, this means in 6 months from now, we could expect them to reach this line and take Orikhiv. And then by the end of 2026, Russian army units could be at the gates of the city of Zaporozhye. This is a major urban area, home to 800,000 people before the war. Same goes for Kharkiv Oblast, but there the fighting proved to be much more difficult for Russia, as we've seen with the latest Ukrainian counterattacks in Kupiansk. Nonetheless, I believe that at some point, the AFU will be forced to abandon the east bank of the Oskol River and the entire district of Veliki Borluk. And the cornerstone of this entire maneuver is the town of Kupiansk, which is the reason why both sides are fighting so hard for its control. Now, to sustain the current operational tempo, apart from military production, Russia must ensure sufficient manpower on the front line.
Now when you harvest more meat, pour bullet!
To do so, just like in 2024 and 2025, the Russian Ministry of Defense will most likely seek to attract thousands of volunteers with generous financial incentives. Multiple reports indicate that Russia recruited 400,000 military personnel in 2025 alone. We're talking about an average of 30,000 men enlisting every month. If you ask me, it's very sus. It's as if the Russian Army Command found a cheat code to produce more soldiers at will. Now, jokes aside, I'm a bit dubious about these figures. First of all, because there's no real proof. And if the recruitment rate was really that high, why did Putin sign a decree mobilizing reservists from the active reserve? Why is that move necessary if they have allegedly so many volunteers? Something's not right. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it. Link will be in the description below. On paper, these reservists are only meant to protect critical infrastructure on Russian soil, such as oil refineries. But my question is, what can riflemen possibly achieve against Ukrainian drone strikes? It's not entirely far-fetched to believe that 200 to 300,000 active duty reservists could eventually be sent to the front. For example, they could rotate out the troops mobilized in 2024, some of whom have been on the front line for over 3 years now, or they could be used to open another front, to further stretch out Ukraine's manpower. For example, Ukrainian authorities ordered the mandatory evacuation of 14 border villages in Chernihiv Oblast. This could indicate that the AFU is expecting another Russian cross-border incursion in the sector. Or perhaps it's to fill up the ranks of the unmanned systems forces. But what is certain is that these reservists are not going to be paid to sit idle in some remote factories in Siberia. Now let's analyze the Ukrainian perspective. Long story short, Ukraine will have to make hard choices about its priorities. However, given the AFU's past behavior, defensive efforts are likely to concentrate in Donetsk Oblast, and particularly around the crown jewels of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, in a way that fits with option 2 of the Russian battle plan. Give up ground in Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and trade space for time. If we go back to Budanov's statements, I believe Ukrainian officials are well aware that they're currently losing the war, or at least have accepted that a return to the 2022 borders is no longer realistic, let alone those of 2014 that include Crimea. The real question now is not whether territory will be lost, but how much. Put simply, the armed forces of Ukraine are effectively fighting for the best possible terms at the negotiating table. Paradoxically, that shift could make the Ukrainian military more lethal. By abandoning plans to reconquer occupied territories, the AFU can shift its focus to strengthening defensive positions and thus preserving its manpower. In my opinion, that could explain why for the first time since 2022, The General Staff of Ukraine didn't launch any large-scale counteroffensives in 2025. The Kursk operation was really the final blaze of glory, and a costly one too. That's why, throughout 2025, Ukrainian forces remained on the defensive. And contrary to previous years, they were not scared to give up ground to the enemy. In military terms, we call this elastic defense. However, that doesn't mean they remained passive. In the past months, Ukraine launched multiple counterattacks with elite battalions and specialized assault units. That's how they reduced the 20-kilometer-long Dobropilya salient in August 2025, or how they rolled back months of Russian gains in Kupiansk. Those are good examples of what we can expect the AFU to continue in 2026. Rapid, local counterattacks. Aside from this operational awakening, we can also witness the root of large reforms taking shape in the armed forces of Ukraine. One of them was the reform to restructure the ground forces into army corps. Once again, if you're interested, I made an entire video about it. Link will be in the description below. Essentially, this reform was aimed at improving command and control. And although it's taking much longer than expected, it seems to bear fruit. As a matter of fact, it's the HQ of the 2nd Army Corps that prepared and executed the counterattacks in Kupiansk. This demonstrates greater flexibility within the AFU, where Army Corps commanders can react quickly to threats on the front line. However, these changes, although very positive, are unlikely to be sufficient to decisively halt Russian forces on the battlefield. To do so, Ukraine has to innovate. This is why I wanted to show you this article by Envy Ukraine titled, "How the Army Should Change in 2026," where Brigadier General Biletsky was interviewed. Andrei Biletsky is an interesting character, to say the least. I think he deserves his own video, but long story short, he's one of the founders of the Azov Battalion. These days, he's mostly known for creating the 3rd Assault Brigade from the remnants of Azov after the Battle of Mariupol, and for leading this new formation with great skill. In March 2025, the 3rd Assault Brigade was expanded into the 3rd Army Corps, with Biletsky in charge of this new formation. This goes to show how Biletsky is a well-respected battlefield commander in Ukraine. In the article, Biletsky said that 2026 should be a year of sobriety. After intoxication, there's always a hangover, and after a hangover, there must be sobering up. He explained that if 2025 was the year of the war hangover, then the next one should be the year of sober reform. Look, it wouldn't be a Slavic analogy without reference to alcohol. That's the easiest way for everybody to understand what he means. Blyat, if I want to get shit done, I have to be sober. Yes, that's true. The reality is that the AFU was very wasteful in its management of human resources due to its stubborn static defense doctrine and the repeated counterattacks of untrained mobilized personnel to retake lost positions. Brigadier General Biletsky also clearly stated that any new weapon alone will be able to turn the tide of the war. He declared, "The number one problem is always people." Людей in Ukrainian, or in English it would be more like manpower. Biletsky said that there was an illusion in Ukraine that increasing the number of troops alone would liberate Crimea. The reality is that without high-quality basic training and without a robust corps of non-commissioned officers composed of qualified corporals and sergeants, increasing the number of troops only means increasing losses. You know what? He's right. This is also something that Valery Marcos, the founder of the 47th Mechanized Brigade, complained about. NCOs are simply not respected in the Ukrainian army. Officers view sergeants as subordinates to be ignored, rather than qualified and professional partners. You know what? A bit like companies treat interns. Expectations, reality. In the article, Biletsky reported that, for example, within 6 months, Ukraine would be able to train 3,000 to 4,000 qualified instructors with combat experience. In turn, at a 10-to-1 ratio, these instructors would then be able to produce at least 40,000 fully trained soldiers every month and a half. Not civilians mobilized from scratch, given AKs and sent to the front, but actual soldiers who are able to survive on the battlefield and fight under pressure. This is all very jolly, but where are they gonna find these soldiers? Ukraine can barely attract a handful of volunteers every year. Oh, for sure they can mobilize some more. But mobilize who? Manpower remains the armed forces of Ukraine's most critical vulnerability. Massive casualties, KIA and wounded, Desertion, 185,000 cases of desertion in 2025 alone, so much so that in December, the Prosecutor General's office ceased publishing reports on monthly desertions. Sounds promising. And of course, corruption, the one that allowed countless men to be declared unfit for duty, and that allowed an estimated 1.5 million Ukrainian adult males to flee abroad despite martial law. Only the poor end up at the front. So now I ask again, who's left to fight? Who's left? It's certainly not the naval brigades. Oh, watch out for the next barrage of Reddit posts. At the current rate, Ukraine only has a year of mobilization left in store. Maybe 2 years if they stretch it. Something corroborated in this Facebook post by Ihor Lutsenko, a former Ukrainian politician and now serviceman of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. And then it's game over. Ukraine will have exhausted its manpower potential. And if that happens, we could witness the same collapse as the German army in fall 1918. Une débandade, a complete rout. And then you know what? Ukraine is up for grabs. That's the real danger. The solution that Andriy Beletsky, the commander of the 3rd Army Corps, advocated is the robotization of the AFU. Replace humans with machines wherever possible. Pretty dystopian, but this is what happens when nerds take control. Jokes aside, there's some merit, particularly for an army whose infantry component has been stripped to the bone. And this doctrine goes hand in hand with Fedorov, the new Minister of Defense's push for innovation in military technology. Following the same principles, Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi plans to restructure territorial defense brigades by reducing the number of infantry battalions, but making sure they're fully staffed, while refitting the remaining battalions into dedicated UAV units. Beletsky also wants Ukrainian forces to expand their use of UGVs or unmanned ground vehicles. Here we can see ground robots deliver Christmas supplies to soldiers sitting on the front line. Here's another example where a Rattle M UGV drove right up to a combat unit and rescued a wounded soldier. These robots effectively replace a lot of troops that were risking their lives in supply runs and medevacs. Overall, the idea would be to reduce the manpower needed in logistics and support units in order to reinforce rifle companies. But this military innovation goes even further: the combat use of these ground robots. In this video, we see a K2 UGV sneak up to a rifle team of 3 Russians and then detonate a couple meters away from them. The Ukrainian company DevDroid has expanded their Ravlik Logistics UGV into the Combat Droid Raw 12.7. As an example, one of the UGVs of the 5th Assault Brigade, armed with a 12.7mm machine gun, ambushed a Russian MTLB troop transport. Meanwhile, the 3rd Assault Brigade claimed one of their DevDroid TW-12.7 held the tree line for 45 days straight. I'm sorry, Call of Duty, for ever doubting your predictions. Once again, this goes to show that the main focus for the armed forces of Ukraine in 2026 is preserving their manpower. Beletsky went as far as to declare that over time, infantrymen will become like medieval knights, the elite. Most of the firefighting and logistics work will be taken over by robots, but they will not completely replace assault troops. Apart from manpower, Brigadier General Beletsky then explained that the second problem is paper generals, pencil pushers, the desktop brigade. Beletsky complains that many generals have never participated in actual combat operations. I quote, "Generals were textbook officers, and today they decide people's destinies. Are there any smart, experienced, competent ones among them? Definitely, but they lack practical experience. It's the classic dilemma of meritocracy versus seniority." As a matter of fact, one of the subordinate units of Beletsky's 3rd Army Corps found a creative way to get rid of these paper officers. I'm talking about the 125th Heavy Mechanized Brigade under 33-year-old Major Volodymyr Fokin. He inherited a lot of underqualified officers from the territorial defense. Under his command, every officer had to spend time at the front to demonstrate his professional competence. Let's just say he wasn't fucking around. Beletsky added that all barriers to the growth of capable young officers must be quickly removed. He said, "The most effective of my commanders today are captains and majors who have risen since 2014 and are now performing the tasks of colonels and generals. They're clearly more competent than those who lead solely by virtue of years of service." That's not all. Bilecki also said interesting things on the 23rd of December 2025 in an interview with the Ukrainian YouTube channel Bombardier. I say interesting because Bilecki is truly the only field commander of this conflict that is actually rethinking the art of war, the modern art of war. For example, he talked about DOTs, Долговременная огневая точка, Russian for fortified firing position or DOT. He believes fortified positions don't have the same significance they held in 2023. I quote, "We need a serious and conceptual approach. We need scientific and practical thought. What is a modern field fortification?" According to him, flat, open terrain with no cover is the ideal defense for Ukraine. It's the best environment for Ukrainian UAV operators. And surprise, surprise, this is literally the landscape of Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. Flat, open terrain with barely any cover. That explains why the AFU is ready to give up ground in this area. And related to this, Bilecki also described the withdrawals from tactically unfavorable positions as entirely justified in order to preserve manpower and equipment, especially under degraded logistics, looming encirclements, and insufficient reserves to conduct effective counterattacks on the flanks. That's all I have for you today. Remember to check out Outscale. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are also in the description below.